Hi, everybody.
Hey, guys.
We are back for another episode of Mindful Witchery podcast, and we're so excited today.
We're so excited. We have a special guest today.
Yes, and his name is Dave Eyerman, and he is a Belchertown citizen, as I am myself. And Dave is here today to talk to us about his practice. He does a practice that involves shamanism and acupuncture, and we're going to have a discussion today about those two wellness tactics, and we're just going to have a good time here. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure. A pleasure to meet you guys.
I know we had a conversation. You and I had a conversation on Zoom a few weeks back, and I was just it just amazed me because you think so much like Sarah and I, and it was so nice to hear some of the things that you had to say about wellness and what it really means, and the metaphysical, which is another piece that we talk a lot about. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your business?
Okay. So I'm a shamanic practitioner. I'm a licensed acupuncturist. So I combine that both. I combine that plus coaching into like a whole person approach. So someone comes in and I'm working with them mind, body, and soul. So whatever it could be that it's primarily, let's say it's primarily physical. Hey, I bumped my knee or I twisted my knee and I need to get sprained. We're going to fix that. Okay. Or it could also be I have migraines, but like, okay, let's talk about the migraines. Oh, the migraines is actually from stress. Let's talk about the stress, get to the underneath of it. Or I'm really don't understand this transition I'm going through in life, whether it's a divorce or a death or an illness, and reaching to the soul perspective and saying, not only can we provide you healing in this, but can we also provide you a perspective to understand what's going on. So I really have a wide range of tools to come at to really offer somebody exactly what they need on a particular day.
That's awesome. And I've never heard of that combination before. Huh? That is a new one to me. When she said you were an acupuncturist and shamanic practitioner, I'm like, that's a new one. I have to talk to you because I have experience in like shamanic work.
Mm-hmm.
I've done some in the past, and I ended up stopping doing it, which we can get. But I have so much respect for people in that line of work. I think that's why I backed out too, because I'm like, this is not where I'm at right now. It can get so soul level, like you were talking about, and being able to combine that acupuncture part of it, it's like almost feels like the missing key that like I couldn't do. It's fantastic.
It really is taking in the whole mind. I love the way that you put that with you're working on the mind, the body, and the spirit, and the soul, and it all really has to match up.
Yes.
I mean, it's like when you talk about, when we talk about the chakras and healing the chakras, the balance that has to be there to be able to heal and to realign chakras. The same thing here. It's you have to really combat things from the inside out and the outside in.
Yes. So in Western medicine is really good at, zooming in on a very specific protein, a very specific, cell, joint. They know all the really good at seeing, I like to say they like to see the one ant on the one leaf on the one tree. They're really excellent at that. And it's tremendous what it can do. But Western medicine doesn't see the forest. And so the way that I approach it is like, I'm coming with the forest. Someone comes in and says, this is what's going on. I start biggest picture. And so when someone comes in, say for a session, regardless of what they're coming in for, I ask, where'd you grow up? Tell me about your parents. Tell me about your siblings. Tell me about your relationships. What do you do for work? What do you do for fun? Because I want to understand who you are as a person.
The whole picture.
The whole picture. So if you're coming with migraines, you're coming with, digestive things, you're coming with anxiety or stress, like I want to understand from the biggest possible perspective where things are off balance that are leading you to feel this way. So the advantage that I come from, I have the training from acupuncture, which has a very long tradition, very steeped in a very specific way of looking at health and the way the body's put together. And shamanism as well. It's got a very specific way of like how illness can happen, how it does happen. And so working those together, I think it has a really big picture. We go from micro to macro of like what is going on with somebody and how do we help you come back into a place of balance, of peace, and also not just immediately. I'm also always thinking 5 years, 10 years down the road. So if a client comes in and they're talking about migraines, my job is not just to stop you having migraines today. I want to also think about like, how do we set you up that you're not having migraines in 5 years and 10 years, which is I think it's great. I joke that it's a really terrible business model because I want to set you up that you don't have to come in to see me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you said that, when we were talking in our Zoom call that day, that really resonated with me because just the idea of someone kind of thinking along those lines, because we actually did an episode a couple of weeks ago on kind of the pitfalls of wellness, and one of the biggest pitfalls we talked about were people who were not doing this work to allow people to do it on their own. We're not being a teacher, but really being a crutch.
Yeah.
They make them dependent on the practitioner to fill their own need.
Right.
And it's so refreshing to hear you say that. I'm like,
Thank you.
inside, yes.
I called her that day. I'm like, Sarah, we've got to have him on the show.
I will say that when I started this work, my ego was definitely very invested in it. I was definitely, I was like, I wanted to be known as the guy who had the insight, who said the right thing, who gave you the treatment that made you feel better. I definitely was wrapped up in it when I first started. I've been practicing for 10 years and I've just, been open to in my own growth and doing my work. So I'm very clear now that like my job is to support you for whatever little bit of time that we're together, whether it's an hour and a half or whether it's 2 years. I'm here as a support. I also tell my clients this, that if I see you once a week, then there's going to be 6 days and 23 hours of your life that I'm not seeing you, that are not my responsibility.
Yeah.
So I am very clear with them at the very beginning that I'm going to do everything I can to support you. I'm going to like kind of point you back towards center every time you come in. But then it's up to you to take that and take it the next step.
Absolutely. In any type of, in the wellness world, when you're starting to use words like conduit and healer, things like that make me very, very uncomfortable, that's when your ego is really super involved. And it just like your relationship with your patients and our relationship with our patients as well, clients, it's a relationship, and a relationship cannot involve ego. It just can't. It can't handle it, whether it's a personal relationship with your husband, your wife, or a person who's your client. Ego cannot be involved.
Hard to see the person when your ego is
Yes.
in the way, too. And I've noticed that, too, because, we've talked about this, too. Like, it feels so good for somebody to walk away and be like, oh, I've never felt so good in my life.
Absolutely.
And, I feel so relaxed. You're magic. It's so, it feels good.
Sure.
It feels like, because you put so much work into it. But, yeah, it can be really, I remember this situation once where that happened, and I'm like, in my head, I was just like, oh, I'm so much better than everybody here. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Check yourself.
Check yourself, girl. Because it was like that moment where I was just, why am I here? Like, why am I letting my ego get in the way?
What is your intent?
Creating space for this person.
Right.
And it helped me take it more seriously, like my intention behind my practice and who I worked with, which is very important, and who I let come and see me in a way, because it's like it's an equal exchange.
It is.
I feel. And
it's it's equal, and you get to kind of figure out where it's important to look at. It's important to have some sort of balance, right? It's like it's important for me to get paid for my services.
Sure.
And it's not because I'm like a money grower. It's because like I have a mortgage and I need the lights to come on in order for me to do healing work. So but it's interesting. You mentioned the word conduit and healer, and I was listening to that episode that you guys recorded about that, and I think it is. I think it's also how it's said. I don't think it's not necessarily just the literal, because I will use that term sometimes where it's like, I'll say I'm a healer, but I had the hardest time accepting that term for the longest time, and I had like long discussions with my wife about that, about like, what is this thing, like it feels too much pressure, that's not on me. But I think it's a succinct way to say this is the field that I'm in, and like I'm very clear with my clients that I'm not doing much. When I'm talking to them, I'm gonna say, let me offer this. What do you think about this? What does
You
this,
make
does
them
this
an
land?
active participant.
Have to.
Yes.
Have to.
It's almost like you paved the way for them to kind of make their own journey.
Yes.
Like you're the one who kind of shovels the snow out of the way.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a great. Yeah.
Yeah. That's so refreshing to hear. That just brings so much joy to my heart.
And it's just so much about I mean, I always come back to this, the word intentions. No matter what you call yourself, your intent really is the driving force. And when you marry the two ideas of shamanism and acupuncture, you're really creating a universe where it's so individualized and so very, very personal.
Yes.
I mean, even I'm a Reiki practitioner, and Reiki for me is very personal. But when you marry, shamanism seems to go very inward rather than outside, kind of, nature versus nurture type of thing. It seems like shamanism really goes so deep and so personal and has to be completely accepted by the person who's receiving the training or the healing, or and then add acupuncture to that. You've created something so individual and so personal and meaningful. I just think it's fascinating that you have combined those two things and made it what it is.
Thank you. And it's just what I was called to do. It wasn't a thought on the outset. Oh, I'm going to study acupuncture. Oh, I'm going to study shamanism, and that's because nobody's doing that. It was just like that's how it unfolded for me.
Actually, could you talk about kind of how you got into it? I'd be so curious.
Yeah, sure. Well, different tracks. So for me, for shamanism, the short version, when I was 19, I nearly drowned, and after that, I had a few months where I had a rough time mentally and emotionally, and so at some point in there, I was in college and we were going to a bookstore, and I found myself in the religion New Agey section. So I like to say, like, these books fell off the shelf into my cart. Books on Buddhism, books on Zen. And I also picked up this book on called The Medicine of the Cherokee. And it was probably like another 3 or 4 years before I actually opened it and read it. But it really, because for me, like, the Buddhism and the Zen really kind of lay down like the foundation of, like, here are some basic principles of yin and yang, basic principles of balance, of self-sufficiency, of looking within for your answers, balance, those sorts of things. And then shamanism adds all of these other colors to it. All the colors, like, this is how you work with the elements, this is how you work with different plants and animals, and really bringing home, like, I feel like Buddhism is I love it, but it's very philosophical, where shamanic, while also philosophical, is a lot more really kind of tangible. How do I connect
and it's action
to this world?
It really is action. I know one of the things that we had in common is that I started out the same way. I started out with that Buddhist foundation, the foundation of Buddhism, and to do with us witchery, to be a witch, really just added, like you said, the colors to that, and it was more active than passive.
Yeah.
But the philosophy was there. And then you make these connections with, wow, there really is a huge connection here between being a witch and understanding Buddhism and understanding the Noble Truths.
And almost to make it more complete.
Yes.
Like, it added more color, and I really like that visual, like, adding more color to it. I think very similar to me is my foundation was more like spiritualist. Just I grew up there's ghosts around, and like a little more like witchery, and I think as I continued, all the things I learned, massage and meditation, that collective filled in those spaces where I'm like, okay, I think I get it now. Even my little stint doing more shamanic practices too, I'm like, I'm so grateful I learned what I did, because it colored over everything else that I've done, and I keep it such high regard in my heart that I have the ability to work with people in that way. It's I hate to call it magical, but it's in my body. That's how it feels.
Magic with a CK.
Yeah, it never felt so connected.
Yes, and that's there's, first of all, there's a huge overlap between witchcraft or witch practices, Wicca, and shamanism. Huge overlap of connecting with the natural laws of nature, of the universe. I think this is how the energy around us works, and we can see it right here. I think Buddhism, the best that I understand it, and I'm by no means an expert, but the way I understand it, it's always felt to me like, okay, here's a mental structure. Here's how you can look at the balance of yin and yang. It's kind of like a training for your mind, and how do I approach myself, and how do I approach life. And shamanism adds, I think, a little more of like the practical of like, okay, we talk about the seasons, you talk about the the cycles of the moon and the cycles of the year and the just the natural flow, which we're all a part of. And so to me, it is a center. It is so much connected because as much as we, as advanced, quote unquote, advanced as we are as society, the more quote unquote advanced we are, the further we are getting from our natural animalistic connection to the land.
Yeah.
And so shamanism really kind of reconnects that, reminds us, reminds me, reminds people who look at it, our actual animalistic, true
the reptilian
connection.
mind.
Yeah.
Yes. So
there is that sense of like, there's like a deep itch that gets scratched.
Yeah, it's like ultimate awareness in a very grounded way.
And we don't even necessarily have to be like know much about shamanism to really understand this. If you just take a walk in the woods, you're like, I feel better. Yeah. It just feels nicer.
Where does that come from? Exactly. Where does that come from?
It helps you remind you of who you are, too. And it's
I think once
so close to witchcraft. It's so close. It's like right.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like brother and sister.
Absolutely.
And once you do anything where you realize whatever pops in your head that makes you realize that everything is energy, no matter what you're practicing, it changes your whole world. Once you realize that rock over there has energy, the moon has energy, the stars have it, it changes you. Just internally and externally, it completely changes you.
Right. Shamanism takes that, one more step and says, not only does these things have energy, but they have consciousness. So they actually have there's a spirit, native tribes speak of like the stone people and the star people and the tree beings. And these are not, it's not like anthropomorphizing these. It's like, no, these actually have a spirit.
Yes.
This is fact. And then we can communicate with them and we can understand them. And immediately now all of a sudden, I'm never alone. I'm always in connection with beings.
Yes, yes.
It's always there.
Your crown chakra is always open.
Yeah.
You always have friends around.
Yes.
Exactly. Nobody's ever. But it's true though.
Yeah.
You're never lonely.
No.
Like I've considered.
Or alone.
Yeah, you're never alone. Yeah. It's
I'm lonely a lot, Lori.
It's just one of those things. I think when I realized that, like it popped into my head at some point. That I think it was when I started exploring witchery and just knowing that everything around you has a voice. It has, especially with crystals. I'm a crystal worker. I'm a crystal girl. It's my jam.
Yep.
And just to know, and I always tell people that with a crystal or with a stone, why wouldn't we listen to them? Because it's the oldest thing. It makes up the oldest part of the oldest thing on Earth in the universe. Why would we not listen to them? The ancient voices of the stones. And once you realize that whole energy thing, man, it's like I just rediscovered it. I'm going, wow, right now, mind is exploding.
Just thinking of that meme, like the guy's just like,
yes, it's like an awakening.
Like, oh yeah, like not alone, not alone, never will be.
And it adds so much. It has so much more layers to it. Instead of just kind of like, okay, how do I take care of this plant? Okay, I need water and sunlight. It's gonna actually talk to this plant.
Yes.
It's like, actually, this is what I'm doing spiritually for this environment. I'm actually helping balance out the energy between you and your partner. You guys are fighting all the time, but my role spiritually, like the energy, and that kind of help balance that out. So to feed me, you want to offer this kind of, put me in this room or do this over, offer being, I want this kind of light. It's much more specific about what that specific being wants. And you talk about crystals, and while you can look up in a book, this is what amethyst does, and you have personal experience with amethyst, each individual stone has its own thing, has its own personality. Just like we could say all women share a certain thing. And then we say, okay, women from Massachusetts are going to be different from women from California.
And then that woman in Belchertown is going to be different from that woman in East Hampton.
Right, exactly, right? Yeah. And then you take age and you take, all the other different ways that we can break down, how a person is. And like that's no different for crystals. It's no different for plants. It's no different for trees. It's kind of like, okay, there's an overarching thing. Yeah, we can generalize women like this. We can generalize amethyst like this. We can generalize gold like this. But then we can also say, all right, but this very specific being has its own history, has its own consciousness, has its own story to share. And this is where the shamanic work really kind of comes in. Like, okay, how do I work with this specific being?
So is there a particular lineage that you follow, or is it just kind of more of a holistic approach to shamanism?
I follow core shamanism. So there was a man who died a couple years ago. His name was Michael Harner, and he was an anthropologist. And in his studies, he went around and studied with different tribes all over the globe, and worked with tribes in Peru and all over. And what he found was that these tribes, which had no way of communicating with each other. Right, this is pre-internet days. This is, isolated from modern society, quote unquote modern, quote unquote society. That they had some of the same basic principles about how the spiritual world works, and these same basic techniques, these same basic perspectives on how trauma affects one's body, one's spirit, one's mindset. And so what he developed was this thing called core shamanism, which is tribe independent. And it's saying, okay, here's the techniques, here is the commonality that's true all over the globe.
The core
yes, of it.
The core.
And so that's the bulk of my teaching. I've had some teachings from Winnebago and Lakota and Cree, but I've never lived with any of those cultures. I'm not ordained or been part of a reservation or anything that way. But I have certain teaching from it, but I can look at that and say, all right, well, I can understand, say, for instance, talking about the directions, where a tribe in present-day North Dakota would have a certain association with north, south, east, and west, would be different from a tribe in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Right? It would be different from, and then like a tribe in, say, in some island tribes, they don't have north, south, east, and west. They have, their directions are towards the mountain and towards the sea. And for me, it's like, I'm not here to preach like this is what north means, this is what the directions mean, but the deeper element of that is about we're looking to the land to teach us.
The intention is the same.
Yes.
The foundation is the same. Very much so.
So how do I, the basic philosophy, how do I look at the world around me to understand myself, to understand how this all fits in, to understand what is this crazy soup that we're in? And so for me,
crazy soup.
it's for me, it's less about a specific lineage and more about like the deeper connection. And the other piece about shamanism is that it's about direct experience. It's about, this is my experience with this plant. It's my experience with spirit. That is where the part is internal. It's kind of both internal and external.
Your personal relationship with spirit.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, like, with my massage clients that I did, I'll talk about creating space a lot. To me, like, that's kind of my motto in life when I work with people. I'm creating space for you, and that's all I'm doing.
Yeah.
And I make sure the space is a comfortable space, a safe space, a space you want to be in, and a space that will always be here if you need it. Even if I'm not.
And how can you recall the space? Exactly.
You can recall the space for yourself.
That's what I do in meditation class as well.
Very similar. So I was going with that too. That's all the things I've done in my meditation practice right now. That's the most important thing.
That's in our foundation of meditation class that we do is creating that safe space for you that you can come back to whenever you need to, and whether I'm there or not, and I probably won't be. How do you get back there? That's the practice. That's the whole meditation. It consists of how to get back there.
Which comes back to what you were saying before about, like, say, dependence on a teacher or a practitioner. Is that like, well, okay, so yes, I'll create space in my office or you and yours, but it's ultimately it's about that feeling that happens within inside that person. And so how do you get back there? It's not like you need to be physically in my office to be in that space. It's how do you call that up for yourself? How do you remind yourself of that direct experience of that place of center? And the more you say, like, okay, well, these are things that are pulling me off center. How do I relate to them differently? And then, really everything in shamanism, everything's a relationship. Okay, it's not, how do I just need to dump this boyfriend or get a new job. And that might still be the right answer, but it's like, how do I look at the situation and relate to it differently?
Yes.
And like, there's that, which requires often an inner shift. Like, how do I...
A paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Yes. Buzzword. Got to throw paradigm in there somewhere.
But that's also where it comes to, the client's responsibility for taking care of themselves. So I had a client a few years ago who came in with migraines, and essentially the migraines were essentially created from her own stress of trying to be the perfect mom. Like, I need to give my kids the most, every trip and every part of Christmas, we have to watch every special and go to all. And she was driving herself crazy around that. And so ultimately, the healing work for her was not like, yes, there are acupuncture points to help with the specific kind of migraine she was having, but ultimately it's about how do you let yourself off the hook of being that kind of mom? How do you remember that sort of like the mindset that we're talking about in our office and bring that back when your 3 kids are calling at you? And that's her own work to do. And there's nothing I can do that's going to force her to do that.
You're giving the tools, and it's really up to them to do with the tools what they need to do.
Exactly.
I always think too, it's kind of like reminding the person of who they are.
Yes.
It's like almost like awakening something in them that they already knew.
Yes.
That I'm sure they already knew. They just didn't have the space for them to remember it or recognize it.
It is more common when I'm offering, say, a new perspective, or if someone's new to shamanism or Chinese medicine or just spirituality, I offer something. It's more than like, oh my God, that's totally brand new to me, but it's more like somehow that explains something that I already kind of knew. That put a word, that put a phrasing on it, that put a perspective on it, that like, that makes sense. So that's, anything, whether it's, and I tell my clients this, listen, if I offer something and it doesn't land, ignore it. Don't take my word for it. This is your life that I'm not living your life for you. So I will say something. You're like, no, that's not it. Like, okay, cool. Yeah. Fine. Great.
And we are our own worst critics.
Yes.
We are our own worst critics. And I always think about, in terms of when you begin a journey like shamanism, and even if you're starting the journey of meditation or you're doing Reiki for the first time, everybody wants the secret pill. And if you don't find that secret pill in session 1, you are a failure. Or if you don't become a Buddha after the first meditation, you are a failure.
I've tried, it doesn't
We're
work.
just we are our own worst critics, man. And that, I think that's common across every wellness, every different type of wellness process is they have to be able to and willing to move forward with the tools that we gave them and not to see themselves as a failure at the beginning. Right.
I heard a really great quote recently. It's kind of like, in order to be good at something, you have to be bad at it first.
Yes. That's beautiful. Yes, it's true. I know I run into people who I see in the first meditation class, and then they don't come back. And I'll see them at the grocery store, and I'm the first person to go up and say, well, we miss you. Why didn't you come back? And, they're like, oh, I just wasn't good at it. I couldn't. It was like a monkey mind. I couldn't get focused on it. That gets easier as you move forward. It really does get easier if you really practice it, put it into your daily practice, make an effort. It does get easier, and sometimes they come back and try it again.
And I think that's why we developed that foundation course too. Not to plug us, but because that happened a lot. Like we'd be like, "Where were you?" Or because I met Lori because she came to my meditation, and thank God we kept coming back, because people would come and go, and it almost made me check myself, like, what am I not teaching that isn't helping them come back and feeling like they can do it? And that's kind of what birthed our foundations class that we do, which I love, and I can't wait to teach again, which will be great.
It's all about the myths. Like, what are the myths of? I mean, I always think about the myths of shamanism being this dark kind of. There's myths that go along with every different wellness practice, and one of them with meditation is that you're going to sit in the lotus position and float the first class, or either you can or can't do it. There's people who can't do it, and we work on dispelling the myths. Right. Before anything else, before we even get into the meditation practice, we work on dispelling those myths.
I like telling people when they talk about, like, oh, I couldn't do it because my mind is going, like, that's actually a sign that you are doing it.
Yeah.
Because you can witness, you see that your mind is doing that.
What's going on.
Because these crazy people who say, quiet your mind. Yeah. It ain't going to happen.
There isn't. I mean, I love when people say that, because it's like they're expecting there to be a mental process to stop a mental process. And that's never going to work.
No, it's never going to work. That's you're destined for failure if you're trying to quieten your mind, folks. Right. It's absolutely.
I have trouble trusting people who tell me that, because I'm like, well, what's going on in your mind? So I'm like, why are you telling me that? Are you trying to control me? I don't trust anybody. That's why I'm like, what are you doing?
So, Dave, what are some myths about shamanism?
Ooh. What are some myths about it? I think maybe is that it's maybe what a shaman is. I think that's a good place to start.
Actually, that's a great place to start. We probably should have explained that.
So the word shaman actually comes from the native language from Siberia, and in that culture, it means healer or one who sees in the dark. One who has like a foot in both worlds. That's the kind of context of it.
The veil is thin.
Right. But that's just where that word comes from. But in different parts of the world, they have obviously different languages and different terms for it. So in Korea, I think it's called mudang, and in Hawaii, it's kahuna, and there are terms all over the globe that have different meanings. But the underpinning still in that core is that it's a tribe given term, right? So on English, we just might use shamanism to cover it all, or the word shaman to kind of cover all the different languages, different tribal names for that position. I'm never going to call myself a shaman, right? I'm not a member of a tribe. That is not my thing. So the idea that a shaman, you can like read a book and call yourself a shaman, or you can take a class and then you're a shaman. It's kind of like, no, that's not it. So people can be, or non-tribal members can certainly be, included in that, and in different tribes can you say like, what, we accept you, and like we will now ordain you, or whatever the language is for that particular tribe. But we'll like say like, yes, you're now one of us. But for most of us, that's not the case, and that's maybe that's my path some point in the future, but it hasn't been. But so I will call myself a shamanic practitioner. So I think that there's I think it's important for that distinction is one of the myths, is kind of like what a shaman is.
It's kind of like that whole Reiki master jargon. The word master.
I'm a master.
I'm a master. I'm never a master. No, I'm a Reiki practitioner.
Yeah, that's what I used to say too when I would do more like shamanic. I'm doing shamanic techniques. I will never call myself a shaman, and I felt really strongly about that because of basically what you said. Like to me, it's a very ancient, beautiful position to be in, to be appointed by a community, or just be your calling to be called to be a shaman. And like, I don't want too far. It's like, what's the word I'm looking for? That's sweet.
And I think the other thing about there's the way shamanism, I think, is practiced in tribes, and the way that it's more applied in modern day, in Western culture. So in a tribal culture, everybody has their own role to play. And it's there really isn't a sense of money. It's just kind of like, no, everybody in this community has their role, right? Where here, while I'm a shamanic practitioner, I'm a member of society, so I pay my taxes, and I still have to take out the trash, and I have to, do these things that in tribal times, a shamanic practitioner or shaman wouldn't have to do. So, it's a different style, it's a different way of using it now. I think the other thing around that's shamanism is kind of like, everything is spiritual, and everything is I think there's a connotation to it that I think is unhealthy, and I want to try to articulate it. This is a wonderful question I've never been asked before. So the shamanic world, the shamanic perspective, is that we have this what we call ordinary reality, this 3-dimensional that we experience with our 5 senses. This is the world that we all know and we spend almost all of our time in. But there's also this layer to reality that's called non-ordinary reality, that where spirits live, and it's kind of like an overlay to where we are. And there's a lot more detail, to a lot more breakdown of that. But a shamanic practitioner or a shaman is said to have a foot in both worlds. Is a kind of a liaison for the tribe between ordinary reality and non-ordinary reality, to get information, to remove energy, to bring energy in. That's helpful for healing, or for the entire tribe's well-being. Now, that's not necessarily applicable in some of that is not some of it we have to applicable in today's world. We have to modify it. Where for me, the way that I'm practicing it, the way that I teach it, also is really about a personal connection to the natural world. and being able to really deepen your understanding of like, okay, how do I understand the plants on my property, the trees on my property more? It's not my property, of course, but like where legally my property, but it's not actually my property. How do I communicate and work with these spirits more so I can just live a more connected life, a more harmonious life with everything, instead of just kind of like National Grid has to come down and chop off some branches off of these birch trees in my front yard. I get that it's got to be done, but I want to do something for the birch trees because, like, you know, their arms are getting cut off.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it accessible to everyone. I think if you went into the situation with the purest of shamanistic practice, like the purest of philosophies, and said there is shamanism is about lifting the veil between this world and the next, I don't think you'd catch everyone. I think that there are people who really don't. That's not their philosophy. It's not their belief. It's really hard for them to visualize if they're a concrete thinker. But when you turn it into something that's so relatable with nature, and I think that makes it accessible to so many more people and helpful to so many more people.
And which is, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps as I'm thinking about this, is because like we're all here, we're all part of nature. We're all, you know,
we're
like,
not set apart from
right.
it. As much as
It's
even if you're living in like downtown Manhattan,
Yes.
you know,
We're in
like
it.
you're still not you're still part of nature. You're still, you know, affected by the elements and by the weather, and like there are still spirits of the land from on
Absolutely.
Manhattan Island. So the idea of not understanding that and not connecting it it's almost like you're kind of lopping off a huge section of what life is and just not even connecting to it. So it's not that I live all the time in non-ordinary reality. Like, no,
Right.
I have to. I live most of my life here in three-dimensional ordinary reality. But because I understand that, I can connect to that when necessary.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I go for a run, I come back and I'm gonna use my, lean on my tree to help the tree in my front yard to stretch on. I always ask it permission. Like, hi, how you doing? Is it cool if I do this? And it's just a sign of respect instead of kind of like, well, who gives a shit? It's a tree. I'm just gonna just do whatever. I'm respecting this as another being.
Same thing with rocks and crystals, in the idea that when you're on a riverbank at a riverbed and you see a river rock, you ask permission to take it.
There's permission. There's reciprocity.
It's a
balance.
respect. It's just a mutual respect for everything, including you, that is in nature.
Yes. So for me, like that's one of the to make it accessible is it's less about the spiritual experience of a shamanic journey or of a soul retrieval, and while those can be tremendous and life-changing, and I totally support
Super
that.
intense. Yeah.
It's also about, for me, it's about a day-to-day. How do you add this into your understanding of who you are and how life is? So I actually teach a year-long shamanism program.
I was just going to ask you about that
Yes.
because I got the email. Yes.
So I teach a year-long program, but I call it Walking the Shamanic Path, because while yes, we'll talk about we go over specific shamanic healing techniques, more of the class is about relationship. More of the class is about working with natural allies, working with walking your normal day-to-day life with this added perspective in, and like how I'm not training shamans.
Yeah.
Right.
If some of my students end up are healers and they end up adding in shamanic techniques in part of their healing practice, great, awesome. But for me, it's more about the specific. How do I learn how to connect with the spiritual world for this added benefit for myself and for others?
And that's so individual.
Yes.
That makes it so much more individual and takes the pressure off of, I have to learn this. I have to learn this technique to be able to do this.
Right.
It allows it to just every person to be able to take it in as they need to take it in and leave with what they need to get from it.
And right, because every experience, every person is going to be
Yes.
different. I've done hundreds of soul retrievals, and every single one is different.
Yeah.
So when I teach it, it's kind of like, here's the basics, but you gotta have to be creative and kind of figure it out as you
Go
do it.
forth, my child.
Just
Yeah, it's like,
and it's just kind of all right. This
This
is
unfolding of yourself.
Yes.
Those words kept ringing in my head. It's just like it's this constant unfolding, and it's almost like we talk about witchcraft as a lifestyle choice, and I'm seeing it very similar. Like
yes.
walking the shamanic path is a choice, and it's a lifestyle choice,
Yes.
and embodying that connection brings so much awareness to your everyday life relationships beyond the what did you call it? Non-reality?
Non-ordinary.
Non-ordinary reality. Yeah, and it's so beautiful. That's why I was like lost for words. What you're saying is just resonating so much with me, and I'm
think
just
that-
like, oh, I feel like myself right now. I'm like, oh, just keep talking.
I think it's too. It's why people really grasp when we're talking about organized religions. It's, and I'm going to go there.
We have to go there at least.
Yeah,
once
I mean,
in every podcast.
I think that you have to look at things like shamanism and Reiki and healing practices and wellness as your relationship with something else. Where with organized religion, it's a lot of doctrine, it's a lot of dogma, and really there's very little discussion about your relationship with God or your relationship with the name of the God that you are in that religion learning about. There's very little talk about your relationship with that deity.
I didn't really think about
Yeah,
that.
I mean, I think that's why it makes it so challenging for people to practice on a regular, daily basis their religious beliefs, because they don't really know their relationship with the deity that they're going after.
You're not really taught to have a relationship with yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
You're taught the relationship with God, but how can you have a relationship with God if you can't have a relationship with yourself?
And then you keep going, they end up being the same thing.
Buddhism 101.
Like when people
Absolutely.
when people say like I don't trust anything in the world, it's kind of like I reframe that from like that's more about you trusting yourself, because there is no way you can trust the world entirely. Like because there's no matter what you can do is you can't prevent all illness, you can't prevent all injury, you can't prevent all pain. So like to say that like because the only way I can trust the world is if I don't experience pain. I think another way of saying it is kind of like I trust myself to handle whatever shows up when it does.
Yes.
And so this idea of like God hates me or God's against me, it's kind of like I don't really believe in that. I honestly, if there is a divine being, I don't think it really cares one way or another.
It's why we have free will.
You do you.
It's why we have free will,
If God is like is part of everything, right? Consciousness, spirit, whatever you want to call it, is everything. What is it?
How do we have free will? How
It doesn't care.
It doesn't care.
He's like, I'm here.
Yeah.
Here if you need me. I'm here if you need me. You need to talk. You know my number. Yep.
It's your relationship to it. It's kind of like it's how do I look at this? And I mean, granted, we can get a little. I think there's some general guidelines that are helpful for people to have. You could just say, well, it's my relationship that. I don't know that my understanding to God tells me that I'm supposed to go kill all people who are brown. And it's kind of like, well, okay, but we can't just promote this is your. Well, that's what God told me, and this is my relationship to it. Like, there's got to be some sort of fundamental ideas of healthy relationship and some structure there. So it can't just be entirely that your own personal thing. There's got to be some foundation. So like when I teach this class, or even when I'm working with clients, and like I'm kind of like, here's some things to think about. Here's a basic structure that you can use to apply to other situations. Here's a basic structure of divination. Here's a basic structure of shamanic journeying. But then go ahead and do it. And if spirit takes you somewhere else, then follow that. Cool. But these basic ideas of reciprocity, these basic ideas of respect and communion and community, that's to me that trumps the like. Well, God told me this, so that's it.
Yeah.
And that's such a lot of pressure. I think that this goes back to Buddhism 101, detachment theory. That you have to be happy within yourself. You have to know yourself and your relationship with yourself before you can enter into any type of a relationship or understand your relationship to anything else. Just like you can't make somebody else happy. You can work on yourself and make yourself feel happy, but you can't be responsible for other people's happiness.
True.
Buddhism 101.
And a corollary to that is that it's often through our relationships with other people that you learn more about yourself.
That's definitely.
Like you could sit alone and meditate in a cave for 40 years and conquer all of your personal demons. Then you come out and go to society and go on your first date with somebody, and like you're like, oh, your shit comes up.
I didn't prepare for that.
Right, exactly.
What do you mean?
Yeah, that's such a great point. And how collective of a species we are.
Yeah. How interdependent we really are.
We are, and the weird paradox there is what we're taught in our Western society to not be what we naturally are.
The introvert in me is just going, whoa. Yeah, maybe I should go out and actually be an extrovert for a little while and see how I affect other people and how they affect me, and not just stay in my house. Yeah.
I feel like we're taught that we are separate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Individuality.
Humans are separate from animals.
Yep.
And they're separate from trees and dogs, and we're separate. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Exactly.
And
Like,
cultural too. I mean, it's cultural. I mean, we as Americans, and we are seen this way by other countries and other cultures, we are seen as the independent, not needing anybody to tell us whatever. You know, we are independent people. That always comes up when I talk to friends in other places. Is well, you're so independent. You guys are so independent.
And there's a light side and a dark side to that.
Yeah, sure.
Right? There's health. There's definitely health to be able to do that, and also, you know, I when I talk about this with people, it's kind of like, what is the outside of when we're talking about God? What is the only pronoun that we capitalize in English? It's I. So that's always the most important word in the sentence. And like we do all of these things that are just like gross and subtle that are really about, you know, venerating the individual and forgetting that it's a we, that it's a relationship, that we are interdependent. That for these bananas to be sitting here in front of me at this table, like not only do these have a spirit, but the tree that came from the spirit, the way that it got from the tree to here is like all that journey.
Cause and effect.
It's so like this isn't just a show up out of nowhere.
Yes.
Right? That interdependence between all of us is, again, another thing. We were talking about this before we started recording about the pandemic. This is another thing I think that the pandemic is showing is how interconnected we all are.
Yes.
How like arbitrary these political borders that we've constructed, and like these ideas of like what different races are, different genders, or other identifications. It's kind of like, well, you're still human. And like this virus is still going to come after you regardless.
Yeah. Even as human, we try to separate ourselves from all the other humans.
We like to compartmentalize.
We love to do that. We love to do that.
We're separate from each other. We're separate from nature, and we're, you know, shamanism is kind of connected to all things, all times. We're all in this soup together, and we're like, yes, I can distinguish. There's me, and there's a tree out there, and then I can see that they're different, but we're all in this one thing together. So they're not mutually exclusive. They're both true.
Yeah. And like while you were talking about like collectivism and like the whole collectivism mindset and like individualism is another one. I took an anthropology class and an interpersonal relations class last year, and I kind of blended the two in my head because in a strange way they went really well together. And we were learning about collectivistic cultures. That's one. Cambodia is a great example. And the other study they were doing were all from more Western countries. I think it was either Europe or America. And they asked these groups of people, who are you? And the study always stood out in my head because the people from the more collectivistic countries were like, I am a daughter. I am a wife. I'm a grandmother. I am part of this tribe. I'm part of this village. When they ask more Western individuals, they're like, I'm a business owner.
Right.
I love cars. Like I live
John.
I live in Palm Beach or something like that. And it was interesting to see the dynamic of the perspective of how people live.
That's how it is in India. Like I spent some time in India, and the family that I stayed with, everything connected back to the family. And I look at how me as a parent, how our main goal is to get our kids to graduate from high school, get our kids into a good college, and let them live their own life. Independent of anything regarding us. That is like a parental goal. You know you've succeeded when your kid is independent and has developed a way to live their life on their terms. That doesn't happen in India with families. You never disconnect. You never disconnect from the family. You live with that family, and when it's time for your parents to retire and to be able to live the rest of their life out, you pull them into your home.
Yeah.
And that's the plan from the very beginning.
Right. It's just understood.
Yeah, we just don't. It's so hard to look at. I mean, when you look at a culture like that, and then you look at I guess, Western culture, or even, American culture in general, our goal is independence for those kids. We do not want them living with us after 21, or after 18, whatever it is.
Extremes of it, too.
Yeah.
And where is the happy medium?
Exactly. Because there's going to be some people where that I have to go out and I have to leave India so I can go to this other place so I can make this money so I can support my family. In other places, it's kind of like, I need to be part of this family because that gives me a sense of belonging. And, this idea of, in shamanism, is not just connection to the land and connection to everything around me now, but it is also, there's such a steep history in ancestry. They talk all the time about the ancestors in the sense of like, they call the directions the ancestors of the east, ancestors of the west, grandfather, grandmother. They talk about that, grandmother moon, grandfather sun. Like these are, but also just biologically, like you learn so much more when you can like connect to your own family, and there is so much a deeper sense of belonging of like, oh, I didn't just was born at this year and at this place, just like, okay, I'm my individual thing. It's kind of like, well, one of my teachers says, your life is the result of the love of thousands. And, just in the most bland, basic mother, father, child thing, forget about, divorces and step parents and other people, aunts and uncles and other people have influenced that. Just that's only 10 generations back, just 200 years before you're at 1,000 people. And if you think about how many years that we know of that humans have been here on this planet, like how many people have had to get together for you to be sitting right here in this chair.
It would be interesting to go out and just ask people, how far can you go back in your ancestry? How far can you go back? And a lot of people will say to you, oh, well, my grandmother was this person, my grandfather was this person, my other grandmother was this person, and my other grandfather was this person, and I can't go any farther back than that. I don't know. It kind of amazes me in a way that we have, my family, we have the genealogy person. My auntie was the genealogy person, and she went back to my mother having relatives that came over on the Mayflower. So I know these things because somebody kept them for me, not because I was necessarily interested in knowing, but that, and I think that's one of the hardest things to grasp is we as a Western culture just are not as interested in it and don't see the cause and effect relationship between us and the people that came before us. We didn't just hatch.
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody brought us here.
It's that manifest destiny. Let's cross the ocean, and we'll cross the Rockies, and we'll go to the moon, and and that's great. We want to be explorers, and let's push the boundaries. There's real great health to that, but at the cost of losing where you came from.
Don't forget where you came from.
That connection to all this other stuff. That ends up being a real trouble.
It's actually my huge interest of mine is history and the importance of it. And I think it's kind of where I sit right now. Just all the healing related things I've done, wellness related things I've done. When it came back to it, my main question is always surrounded by, well, where did this come from? What are the roots of this? How can I better understand this? And it always goes back to what was done before, so I can be sitting here now.
And witches do that. I think too, as a witch, as a practicing witch, you are more historically inclined, and you really do respect the witches that came before you. It's important as you being a witch and who you are as a witch, the witches that came before you and made the sacrifices that came before you, so that you could be here today doing what you're doing.
And what you're saying really kind of brings back to like the way that I practice is like, how do I find what that root and balance is? People come in and they say, I have these irrational thoughts, right? This doesn't make sense. My body's doing this. I'm like, no, it does make sense. We just don't know what angle to look at to make it make sense. It's kind of like those art installations where everything's hanging from the ceiling. Like, I don't know how to look at this. And then you go, you're like, oh, it's a chair.
I see it now.
That perspective,
And so that's really, when someone comes in to see me, like that is how I look at it. It's kind of like, what is the biggest possible perspective that I can look at this to make this make sense? How does this make sense? Because it has to. It's not, I don't believe in irrational thoughts or irrational behaviors. They're all rational from a certain perspective. It's probably, chances are what we're calling irrational are coming from a place of wounding. It's coming from a place where we made a false assumption, a false conclusion about life, but ultimately, based on that false conclusion, everything else is logical. So we just got to find why you made that false conclusion. How do we undo that? and then these irrational or nonsensical physical ailments or mental ailments can rebalance themselves, because like, oh, I'm no longer that root, the root pebble, I can take that out, and then now the stream can flow smoothly.
Yes.
As opposed to now it's completely diverting off and flowing all over the place in different ways.
My mind has a million different things coming up, like just completely.
Yeah.
But I would like to know, Dave, how can people get in touch with you if they want to take your course? If they want to get in touch with you to do, maybe some dialogue with you, how do they go about getting in touch with you?
So I have Dave Eyerman is my website. DAVEEYERMAN, like I, like in your face, Eyerman.com, and that's got information about me and the different specific techniques I use and the sessions I have. It's got information about the classes that I teach. Right now it's just this one class. There's more once COVID restrictions lift. But the shamanic training I do starts in June. The one I'm currently doing ends actually next week, and then the new one will start in June, and that's it's both an in-person as well as an online, so you get to choose where you come from. So I can do, right now my online version has got someone from North Carolina, a couple from New York, and someone from Illinois.
Woo, North Carolina.
So the in-person one is in Eastern Massachusetts, in Andover. That's one Saturday a month.
Oh, that's great.
And then the online one is 2 Wednesday nights a month over Zoom. My business in Andover, I used to be in Andover. My business here in Belchertown is called Inspired Being. And so inspiredbeingllc.com has got a little bit more about me, and my wife is a practitioner there too. She's a psychotherapist. She's not currently taking in new clients. I think she'd be upset with me if I if I kind of opened her up for business at the moment. Together we have the center, and
oh, that's fantastic. It's another great combination of things to add in. Like that holistic approach to her being able to do that too.
And what a great way. I mean, you're in such a good place, such a good location. I mean, I'm not touting Belchertown just because I love Belchertown, but I've been here for 15 years, and I have to say that for clientele here, I know in general, people may not know at first exactly what this is or what I do. I have to define Reiki a lot. But once they grasp it, they take it in. And it's just such a beautiful thing. We have such a really, I think, a very enlightened community here as far as holistic and wellness goes, and even the metaphysical. I think we've had really good reception with other witches, meeting other witches in the area.
And that makes sense. I mean, really, like witchcraft and shamanism really makes a lot of sense in an area where you are just always surrounded by nature.
Yeah.
And I've lived in big cities where it's a little bit of a harder sell. It's a harder connection for people to make because they're pretty steeped into the city life.
Sure.
Yeah.
Where here it's so much easier to understand the natural cycles when you see the slow naturally melting.
Absolutely.
You hear the birds.
You don't have the light pollution. You see the stars and the moon and the phases of the moon. It's fantastic. It's a great place to be.
A lot of people's recreational activities, even who are not spiritual, are snowshoeing or sledding or hiking. Just biking, anything outside has got that. So adding that spiritual component to it just deepens that appreciation and understanding.
It's more of an integration with the world around us, especially in this area. And it's interesting because even I lived in cities too, and living in Western Mass for a bit now, it's hard to imagine being able to feel like myself anywhere else because I'm so deeply rooted in the woods now, and I never want to leave. I just want to keep going deeper into the woods and never leave.
The woods are calling and I must go. John Moore. Yes. Yes. The mountains are calling and I must go.
And in fact, I actually just wrote a book and put that out literally about 3 weeks ago on Shamanic Journeying. So the book offers a grounded beginning about shamanism, about the indigenous perspective, about what it means to journey, about your spiritual guidance team, your divine support team of guides and guardians and power animals, and then how to journey. And then with that, after I go through in detail how to journey, I offer over about 150, 200 different journeys that you can try on your own for you
That's
to
lovely. Yeah.
you know,
Fantastic.
explore and
Yeah.
practice and so yeah, that's on my website. That's on Amazon.
And what's the name of your book?
Shamanic Journeying.
Okay, there you go. All right.
Great.
Dave, it has been a pleasure having you on here today.
It's been so lovely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely a pleasure. And it's so nice to meet not only other businesses, but other holistic businesses who really kind of look, and in your idea of looking at the whole picture of a person, mind, body, and soul, that's where wellness starts and where it ends. And it's just, what a wonderful practice. And we will be putting up your information on our Facebook page and on our Instagram page
All the socials.
so that everybody can see it. And we are just, it's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Absolute
This has
pleasure.
been lovely.
It's
Yeah.
been great.
All right, guys, we're going to head out now, and we've just so enjoyed this so much. I've just enjoyed this so much.
Yes, thank you guys, and we will talk
We'll
to you next time.
see you soon.
Bye.